Hey, how's it going? So this video, I wanted to talk about some of the unloved or hidden or slightly obscure features about the camera which might help you get out of a pinch. I'm sure you might be familiar with some of these features already, but hopefully we can put a little spin on it which might make you think a bit differently and get more use out of the camera. And if not, please go ahead and flame me in the comments. First up, we've got low bitrate modes. So if, like me, the recording format was one of the first things that you set on the camera and then you never looked at it again, you might be in for a little surprise. If you've ever gone to a shoot and realized you've left some of your memory cards at home, or perhaps you're doing an event or a wedding that's gone on super long and you didn't have enough storage for it, or you just want to be efficient with the data that you're storing, then check out this menu option, which will unlock a different kind of recording method to what the others give you. Now you might be thinking, to save space you're probably going to lose out on 4K and or 10-bit, but actually in this mode you get a 72 megabits per second format which keeps 10-bit and 4K. If you compare that to the other 4K 10-bit mode, this is actually going to take up half the space of that one. That's 150 megabits per second, and this one is 72. Now the reason it can do that is because it's using H.265 as the recording format, which is much more efficient as a codec. But the downside of that is when it comes to edit it, you're probably going to want to change that to a proxy unless you've got a really beastly PC. It is more intensive on your CPU, so your PC might find it a bit more difficult to edit and it might get laggy. Otherwise, there's one more caveat to consider with this. That is that it's 420 10-bit and not 422. So if you're trying to do a green screen, it might not be as super precise as the regular 10-bit 422 mode. Now in my case, when I got the camera, I switched it to the MOV mode because I'm editing on a Mac, and I thought that might be a better wrapper to use for the H.264 footage. Now what I didn't realize is that that meant I wasn't going to get these other low bitrate modes for full HD. These could save you in a real pinch if you need loads of recording time on very little space. But it should go without saying that there's going to be some kind of quality compromise at that point. Next up, I want to talk about the X-Teleconverter mode, or ETC. Now you already know that'll give you extra punch in when you want to be able to zoom a bit further into your subject, but you just don't have the focal range to do it on your lens. And that's especially useful in 4K mode because on the GH5 there's virtually no loss in quality, whereas in HD mode or using ETC on the GH5S you probably will notice some degradation in quality. But beyond just getting extra reach with your lens, let's consider two extra features that you get out of this function. First off, let's talk about depth of field. Now I know everybody's going crazy over getting a shallow depth of field and getting that full frame look, etc. But actually getting a deep depth of field can be really handy sometimes. For example, you might have a couple people in the shot that aren't on the same focus plane from the lens. You might be doing macro work, or you might be using a really long lens which automatically gives you a shallow depth of field, more shallow than you want. Or you could be working from a gimbal, and because the autofocus on GH5 and GH5S is unreliable, to say the least. So you want that deep depth of field for the push-in shots with the gimbal, or to allow your subject to come closer to the camera without losing focus. And another really common situation I find myself in is when I'm in a low light situation on the GH5, so I've got a fast lens on there, it's shooting wide open, but if it's anything longer than 25mm, I'm going to struggle to keep my subject in focus if it's fairly close to the lens. Sometimes that razor thin depth of field is actually more of a problem than it is a benefit. So what can you do about it? Well, in 4K mode on the GH5, I sometimes put the ETC mode on and then take steps back to keep the same framing, but I'm much further away at that point, so my depth of field has gone up. You might be surprised by how much difference that actually makes. Even on a 12mm lens, which is relatively wide, the depth of field that you get at 2 meters away at f2 is going to be about 2 meters. Now if you backed away with the camera and turned ETC mode on, you'd be stood at about 2.8 meters away, and that'll actually double your depth of field from 2 meters to about 4.9 meters, and that's shooting at f2. So even though the punch-in is only giving you about 1.4 times on the 4K on the GH5, your depth of field could be doubled in this fairly reasonable situation. Imagine you're rocking the 42.5mm f1.2 from Leica, and this can be a huge difference because you're dealing with such a narrow depth of field when you're relatively close up to your subject. Now the other hidden benefit of the ETC mode is the compression that you get when you turn this mode on. Now you might not think this is a massive difference, but you never know when you might be framing up a shot and wishing it was a bit more compressed, or there was something in the background that you didn't want to get in your frame. So here's a sample 4K shot where the composition is set around the frame, but I want a bit more compression. So we move the camera a bit further away, we turn ETC mode on, and we'll get about the same framing. You can clearly see there's a little bit of difference there in the compression, which you may or may not find useful at some point. So with this added compression, and especially the deeper depth of field, you might find this comes in handy when you really don't want to stop down on your aperture, but you're struggling to keep your subject in focus. This might be a game changer. Thirdly, let's talk about false color. Now the 5 and 5S are blessed when it comes to exposure tools compared to some other cameras. There's a histogram obviously, but even better than that, there's a waveform and there's zebras. Now on a serious shoot, I would get my grey card out and I would get my waveform out and I'd make sure that the grey card is hitting the right point on the waveform and I'd be done with it. But if the light conditions are changing or my subject is moving in and out of light, that can be really difficult and you can't just keep cutting and stopping and getting the grey card out. You know, if something's flowing, then you've got to just run with it. Of course, if you knew where you wanted the skin tones to hit on that waveform and you could clearly see where they were in the frame, then you could still work from the waveform and adjust your exposure accordingly. But the waveform is already quite small, and if you're shooting quite wide or the subject's far away, it's very difficult to pick out the skin tones in your waveform and say, yes, or these are at 50 or 60 IRE, I'm happy. And this is the kind of situation where false color could come in handy. Now, false color is a bit more of an advanced exposure tool, and you get it on the high-end monitors. And it can look weird and a bit daunting if you're seeing it for the first time, but once you understand it, it could be a really useful tool for you. Once you're up and running with it and you're comfortable with how it works, you can quickly see at a glance which bits of your frame are overexposed, underexposed, and you can be looking for those colors which give away good exposure on skin tones, which is really handy if your subject is moving in and out of light or the light's changing, or you just want to be able to quickly dial in your exposure for that skin tone. So how do you get that if you're on a GH5 and a GH5S? Well, you need to have Vlog installed first of all, and you're going to go to this LUT Creators website, link in the description below of course, where you'll download the false color LUTs. It's free, which is pretty amazing given everything that he's packed into there. You've got regular LUTs that you can upload to your NLE, which you could use for exposure in post, but for when you're out shooting in the field, you want the VLT folder. These of course are the Vlog monitoring LUTs, which you can import onto the camera and see on the monitor. So once you've downloaded the LUTs, you want to find the VLT files that you want, and they go straight onto the SD card's root directory. If you need a bit more info on how these work, then there's a PDF embedded in the folder which you can peruse at your leisure. So with the VLT files on the SD cards, put that into your GH5 or GH5S, and then you go into this menu here in order to upload these onto the camera itself. Once you've done that, it's just a case of selecting the viewing LUT that you want to be able to see in the monitor as you're shooting in Vlog. And this does only work in Vlog, I'm afraid. Focus peaking will work in false color, but to be honest, what I've been doing is switching from false color back to a regular LUT so that I can keep focus. So I'll get my exposure first using false color, and there's a chart on the website where you downloaded it from to give you the corresponding IRE values for the colors in the false color. So I'd use that to look for the green and salmon pink areas on my skin tones, to make sure that's decent exposure, and this is what that would look like. Here we're going from underexposed right to good exposure and then to overexposed. So I would do that to dial in my exposure and then flip back to a regular LUT so that I can keep pulling focus. Now speaking of focus, this fourth one might help you keep things pin sharp. Now this isn't really a secret option. You're going into the menus and you're picking out a very obvious monochromatic color mode, but it's when you use that in combination with focus peaking where it comes really useful. You might find, like I do when you're out shooting, that the focus peaking isn't strong enough, or the color could just blend into the background or to your subject, whatever you're keeping in focus, and it sometimes can be a bit hard to pick it out. Flipping into this black and white monitor mode will make your focus peaking stand out even more to make your job easier. I would make sure you've still got the zebras on to show you what's overexposed, because that will still work. But other than that, the color is just a distraction. So you might want to give that one a shot. Next up is a really quick tip, but might be quite obvious. If you dig into the menus, you get to change the file name structure so that each camera that you use can be given a different file name format when it actually spits out the files. I've been using that to differentiate my GH5S from my regular GH5 files, just because a P and all the number doesn't really mean much to me. Alright, those are all the nuggets that I wanted to bring to your attention in this video. I'll see you in the next one.